Hello everybody, it's Don. On this episode of The Naturalist, we're going to take you through several plant propagation techniques to get live, living, new plants from existing plants. All right, so let's go. All right, everybody, I'm back in the greenhouse with Mesa at Wright State University. And today we're going to take you through a couple of things that, if you recall our making coffee episode, we kind of introduced at the time in terms of making an air layer and how you can root a plant from right on another plant and then have two plants instead of just one. So we're going to take you through the process today of making an air layer. And we're also going to pot up the air layer that we made in the past from that coffee plant and talk a little bit more about, some few other things that we're doing around here. All right. So what Mesa is going to demonstrate on here first is how you make an air layer. Okay. And first of all, this plant is a rubber plant. Okay. Rubber plants are really easy to grow and propagate indoors in greenhouse settings. They're tough plants. You can chop them apart and they grow back. They root very readily from cuttings and also from air layers. So Mesa has made air layers from rubber plants in the past and has succeeded very well. So we're going to take you through that process. And again, just to reintroduce you to what an air layer is it's a way to get a stem to root while it is still attached to the parent plant. So at some point later, you can cut the stem that's been rooted and have a new plant while maintaining the old plant. But the old plant has helped keep the plant alive and hydrated while it is forming new roots, okay? But ultimately, you do have to start this process by cutting off the nutrient supply between the roots and the shoots of your new cutting to force that cutting to make its own roots. So Mesa is going to start the process of making the air layer right in this portion of the stem right here. And what this process entails is basically girdling the stem. And you'll notice here that on rubber plants, they exude a lot of latex. Okay, they have a lot of latex in their sap. And of course, you can make natural latex from that. That's why this plant's called a rubber plant. You can harvest that. And so, but nonetheless, the process starts by girdling the stem, meaning we have to remove a section of the bark there to cut off the flow of nutrients, sugars between the shoot there, between this part of the plant and the rest of the plant. Okay? And what that will do, the plant will react to that by forming new roots above that section, as long as you set it up well to do that. All right, so again, what Mesa is doing here is simply cutting down to what's called the cambium layer, where the new phloem is where it originates, okay, and then she'll basically remove that whole section. Again, what Mesa is doing here is removing the bark down to the cambium layer. And the sapwood of the stem is retained so that there will still be water flow between the parent plant and the shoot that we're going to root here. But you remove the phloem tissue. That's the tissue that the carbohydrates flow through on in the stem to feed the shoots and the growing leaves. All right, so we're going to have the plant realize it's been shut off of nutrients and that it's got to grow its own roots and to take over for what it's lost. Okay, so all right, now what you see, if you want to just pause for a second there, basically everything you see here and into the interior of this stem is the sapwood. And then this layer in the bark here is where the phloem would be. The sapwood being the xylem cells, the water conducting cells, and the phloem being the sugar conducting cells. Okay, so again, MESA is removing those sugar-conducting cells and retaining the water-conducting cells. This plant's also very easy to root if you simply just cut off the stem and apply a little bit of rooting hormone and stick it in a pot with soil. But the advantage of the air layer is you have the parent there to continue to provide water to the stem throughout the rooting process. So it's kind of like a support system for the plant while it's forming its own roots. All right, here are bark sections that MESA has removed from the stem. Okay, now the process is complete. And what we're left with here is a section of stem that is devoid of nutritive tissue, but retaining the water-conducting tissue. And you have to make sure you get all of the phloem off of the stem, because the plants have a tremendous capacity to heal from wounds. If you leave a strip of the phloem tissue, the nutritive tissue there, it will regrow. It'll grow new bark and heal this wound. So you have to entirely strip it of phloem tissue to get this to work. And again, this process is called girdling. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next part of this, and that is we have to set this up for the plant to make roots and to put them somewhere, okay, that makes sense. So we're going to basically create a ball of soil or rooting medium that we wrap around this stem and apply a little bit of hormone right up onto the bark above this section, because that's where the roots will originate, and then tie this all up, zip tie it on there, and you'll see the end product. And that's the air layer process. So why don't you go ahead and apply the hormone next, I guess. Okay, you can brush this on or paint it on, and make sure you get up here in the bark above it as well. Okay, so yeah, the roots are going to be coming out of the top of that wound, essentially. Okay, what you look for is the growth of cells, what's called callus tissue around the top of that wound, and eventually roots will emerge from that callus tissue. Okay, so that's plenty. This is a common rooting hormone. There's lots of products on the market that do this. This one's called Hormex, and there's products called Root Tone, and they're usually synthetic auxin mimics. And auxin's a plant hormone that promotes rooting on stems. So that's usually a common ingredient is synthetic auxins that help foster this process. You can get stems to roots without, artificially applied hormone, but it helps, okay? So now what we have here is a medium that's made up of a little bit of commercial potting soil, but it has a lot of vermiculite and perlite in it, just to provide a lot of water holding capacity, but aeration, and just enough soil in there to have a few nutrients so that when this thing starts to make roots, it will put them out into this medium and can grow that way for a while. Okay, so now what we need to do here, and I'm going to have to help on this process, is wrap that around this stem and make sure it's completely filled and surrounded with soil, and then zip tie this bag to the stem. Okay, so why don't we try to do this, Mesa, and I'll help here. Maybe I will hold while you wrap it. Okay, see if that helps. Okay, I have it. If you want to just go ahead and work on it. I'd put a little bit more soil toward the front side of it, if you can. Okay, and the key is just to have that soil wrapping that wounded area in the bark above it. The zip ties are in that plastic bag box. Okay, yeah, so we're gonna use zip ties to basically zip tie the bottom of this and the top of it. Go ahead and start at the top, I guess. Just wanna pull everything together. And again, obviously you wanna make sure that that medium is moist. You might have to periodically go into the bag here and add some moisture throughout the process. For some species, this takes a few weeks. For some species, it might take several months for this to happen, depending on the species. So, and again, we're gonna zip tie it shut. Let's see, I'll try to go right above my hand, I think. Go down as close as you can and I'll move my hand out of the way. Okay. Okay. So I think that'll work. So that's going to serve as our air layer. You can pull this one tighter, actually. Now, the other thing you want to do is, after you've set it all up like this, to wrap the whole thing with aluminum foil. Because what you would get if you let the bag be open to the sun like that is you could get algal growth inside there, and you could have some deterrent effect on root growth out toward the outer edges of the bag if there's too much light. So we basically wrap it just in a section of aluminum foil just to make it dark. Okay, and that's it. Now we'll periodically check this, probably not for, I don't know, a few weeks. We might look at it for the first time, but we know these work well. If we just let that go for a month, or how long did it take, Mesa, when you did this on these last time?
Probably
about a month. And so if you come back in a month, you can almost be sure there'll be roots in that soil ball there, all right? Okay, now what we're gonna do is, tell you what, we're going to move this out of the way. Let's just slide. Well, it doesn't want to slide, does it? We also need to repot some of our plants here. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna pot up the air layer that was made on this coffee plant. Okay, this is the coffee plant that we discussed and introduced during our Making a Cup of Coffee in Ohio episode. And this has had an air layer on it since oh geez, probably July or August. Okay, so this has been on here for months now. And coffee, though, is a slower to root, much slower to root than this rubber plant that we just did. Now, we have been checking this. We know there are some roots in there, but, and regardless of whether they're as optimal as they could be, it's come time to repot this. It needs to be repotted. You can see that the plant has responded by sprouting out below this girdle, okay, making new stems. So when we cut this off, it's just going to continue to grow just fine. But that is a sign that this has been girdled and the plant is responding to the kind of the loss of this upper portion of this plant. So anyhow, we're going to take that apart and pot this up and start the process of having a new independent coffee plant from this mother plant below. Okay, so basically we've chosen a pot here. This is probably not the pot this tree will end up in the end because, you know, they get big. So you can see the size of the pot we have down here for this one. And we'll start it just in potting soil and just let it go for a while. And it'll be repotted probably within a year or two, I'd say. Okay, so Mesa, you want to take a shot at chopping that off? Okay, so basically just go right in here below, right below the bag, I'd say above those little branches right there, and go ahead, just chop it off. You can twist a little bit if you need to. Oh, you're getting it. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so roots or not, it's off. Okay, and again, this will just grow just fine. Okay, it has plenty of new branches it's producing in that vicinity, ready to go and take over. Okay, now, but we're going to make a new plant from this one. So why don't you do the big reveal, Asa? You can cut those if it's easier. Maybe just yeah, whatever works. Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, that's oh yeah, that's nice. Okay, so yeah, we've been watching this plant for quite some time, but you can see there is some nice rooting happening now. We've basically watched this the whole way from the simple callus stage, just a buildup of cells around the top of the wound, and just watching and waiting for a root to pop out of it. Then it finally did. Okay, then for a long time, there was just the one single root that came out with no lateral branches or anything. And but what we have now is if I can do that with the camera. So yeah. We're just removing the zip tie. There you go. Okay. So yeah, we have a nice lateral branching now on this. And let's just kind of take a look at this. So again, this part of the stem, again, the thickening you see there is the callus tissue that's built up. And again, this is a root that popped out of that probably a couple of months ago for the first time. But there are other roots that are starting to poke out of that as well. But this root is sufficient to grow and take over, be the primary taproot for our coffee plant with good lateral branching. You just want to make sure you don't break it during the repotting process. This section of the stem was where the tree was girdled originally, just like Mesa demonstrated. That could be cut off, but it's also not really necessary to cut that off. So let's just stick it in the ground, Mesa, and I would put it so that, this becomes the new, about right here, becomes the new soil shoot interface, okay? So that's about the right depth where you have it. Yeah, I'm just going to center it. Actually, I'll hold it if you want to. Coffee does like a soil has very good drainage, either with sand or pumice. We don't have sand or pumice in this potting soil at the moment, but it has a lot of vermiculite and perlite in it, which basically serves the same purpose. Those white granules you see there is perlite, and those are there primarily for aeration and partly for water holding. So. Going to center this thing a little bit more right there. Okay. All right. So Mesa just about has it. Just pack the soil around it. We'll water that thing in. And again, I think I described to you that some of this, what looks like damage you can see on this plant, is from excessive light exposure. Coffee likes to grow in the shade, and this tree has been out near our front window in our greenhouse all winter, essentially where the sun comes in from the southeast and west sides of the greenhouse. So a little bit of that is sunburn, and those are also older leaves. So these will die off, break off, but then we'll have new growth extend from the tips of these branches. All right, so you think that's enough? Yeah, I think that's perfect. Okay, again, we'll water that. We'll give this a little bit of fertilizer, and this thing is going to become a new coffee plant on its own. So that's the process. All right, now regarding coffee, there's other ways you can propagate coffee too, and that is including growing it from seed. And Mesa, do you want to show and tell us what you've been doing over here?
So these are the coffee cherries that I picked off of there. I waited till they were nice and ripe. And then basically the same process that we did when we were making the coffee, just take them out. I let them dry for about 24 hours-ish. And then now I'm soaking them for 24 hours in water. And then we will kind of place them throughout this tray that's kind of a sand and vermiculite mix. And then we will just wait for them to grow.
Okay. Yeah, so we've not grown coffee from seed here yet. I understand it takes the seeds a long time to germinate, quite variable. It could be a month, it could be 4 months. So we'll just see how it goes. And again, those seeds will just be spaced around in this tray. This tray is sand and vermiculite. That'll be moistened, of course. And then we'll just leave them in the greenhouse and see how it goes. So it's the start of our coffee empire. You've seen it here first, right? So, all right. So in this part of this episode, we're going to talk about other plant propagation techniques you can do with all kinds of different plant parts, including leaves and stems and what have you. So first thing I'm going to have Mesa show you is how to take a stem cutting, just sort of a traditional cutting of a stem, and get that thing to root and get a new plant back from it. All right, so first of all, that plant is something called bougainvillea or crown of thorns. Produces a really nice pink flower all throughout the year, basically. And it's quite easy to root from stem cuttings. We've done this before. And so Mesa here has taken a cutting from basically the tip of the branch. This includes a little bit of last year's growth on it. So we would call this part a hardwood cutting, where if you kept the green part, you'd call that a softwood cutting. So we're going to do a hardwood cutting, which we know works for this species. And Mesa, why don't you go ahead and take us through that? So first, Mesa is defoliating the lower, say, 2/3 of the stem. And the reason you do that is that when these things don't have roots and they have a lot of leaf area, they can dry themselves out by transpiring too fast. So you want to remove some leaf area and basically take it. It's about a 4-inch cutting or so. We're going to dip the bottom end of that in some rooting hormone, which is an auxin mimic. Auxin is a plant hormone that promotes rooting on cuttings, on what we call adventitious roots. And so after, I would actually add a little bit more, maybe a little farther up there. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, and it doesn't take much. That just helps the process along. And then you want to basically get that in the ground, just like that. Pack it in, and we'll water that when we're done. All right, so in the past, we've seen root cuttings like that root in about a month, okay, 3 to 4 weeks. That thing will have roots on the stem, and you can continue to grow it in that pot until it's time to transplant into a bigger pot, okay, because these can grow into actually the size of like small shrubs, essentially. All right. Okay, this hormone, by the way, is called root tone. And there are lots of rooting powders out there on the market. And so this is no particular endorsement for root tone, but we know it works. Okay, so we've used it quite often. Okay, the next thing we're going to take a look at is this plant, which I think most people would recognize that plant as a jade plant. That's a succulent, which is a plant that has fat, fleshy stems and leaves, that stores a lot of water, that is adapted to grow in very dry conditions. And so jade's actually pretty easy to root from its leaves. So this plant in particular is one that we've rooted in that way. So if you see this leaf right here near the base, that's the original leaf we used to create this cutting, this plant, that rooted and then popped off a bud that developed into that vegetative shoot that you're seeing above ground there. So that one was done, with our class in fall of 2022. So that plant's been around now for about a year and a half, roughly. Not even quite a year and a half. So we basically have now a mature, not nearly mature plant back out of it. Okay, so again, Mesa, if you want to demonstrate, you just remove these fat, fleshy leaves here from the base. They can be twisted off or cut with clippers if you'd like. And then essentially the bottom end of that leaf can be dipped in our rooting powder. And then just settled maybe about a quarter of the way into that soil. With this, again, the soil tamped around. With this one, you just have to be careful of not going too deep, because the leaf can possibly rot before it forms roots, which you don't want. And again, this is in all cuttings, you need to keep them moist without drowning them in water. Okay, because at the beginning, they don't have any roots. They're not taking up any water from the base. So you have to make sure that soil, that media remains moist without encouraging rotting by being too wet. Okay, so this media, by the way, I didn't even talk about that. This medium is a mixture of commercial potting soil. We just amended with some extra vermiculite, so it will hold a lot of water, has some nutrients in it, but you don't, need a really rich organic potting soil or compost at this stage. You want these things to, you want to encourage their root development, seeking water, seeking nutrients, before you pot them up into a more growth-promoting medium. Okay, so again, we found those to root quite well like that. And again, that will take a month or two before we would see roots on that. And then jade's a fairly slow growing plant. Again, this grew in about a year and a half. So it takes some time to really get going, but you'll see roots forming on the base of that leaf within about a month or so. Okay, let's hop to the next one. We'll do this one, okay? This is a leaf cutting that Mesa potted up. How long ago was that?
Okay, a couple weeks.
About a couple weeks ago, okay. And this is of a plant called the night blooming cereus. And this thing is interesting because it will produce aerial roots right on its leaves, right on the major veins of its leaf. You will see roots forming while they're still attached to the plant well above ground. And you basically can take sections of the leaf of this plant using the same process Mesa just did for the jade there and get them to root and get a whole new plant back from it. So Mesa, why don't you point to where the new leaf is coming off? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's a brand new leaf coming off of this cutting. So Mesa has one of these leaves, and at the base, if you want to show where the aerial roots are, okay, right here, okay, we have the roots coming off the petiole of this leaf, the stalk of this leaf. And so you can make a cutting that includes part of that, and that'll root right away, but you can even make parts of the, other cuttings of other parts of this leaf, settle them into the soil and get them to root as well. So Mesa, why don't you do at least the base of that one? And again, you can clip these just like you're cutting paper. Right? And again, this already has some roots, but you can help it along by dipping it a little bit in the hormone. Of course, Mesa will be washing her hands when this is all over, I presume. Okay, Mesa here, as you can see, is creating a hole prior to putting that big leaf in there, because you don't want to just shove the leaf in there, or else you'll pull all the rooting powder off as you put it in the soil. All right, just pack it around, and we'll keep these things moist until they root fully. Okay, by the way, all of the offspring we're creating here are clones of the parent. They're all going to be genetically identical to the parent. And so This is a form of what you'd call asexual reproduction. There's been no fertilization happening here. We're getting new plants from existing plants. They're exactly the same as the parent, all right? Okay, our next plant will be this plant, which I think most people can recognize as a snake plant. And this one can be propagated using a technique very similar to what Mesa just showed us with the night blooming cereus. This plant is a little bit different in that it won't display those obvious aerial roots when it's ready to be, propagated, but that's okay. Essentially, you can take leaves, cut them into sections a couple inches in length, put the rooting powder at the base and just settle it in the soil and you'll get a new plant. And again, this is how we propagated this one. So in the middle there is the original leaf cutting that we took, and it rooted, takes some time to root. Then eventually it pops off vegetative buds that grow into the above ground portions of the plant. So again, this was done about 1.5 years ago, and this is where it is now. We have some others in the back of our greenhouse over there that are actually a lot farther along, a lot bigger. So you can get plants back pretty quick from this process. So Mesa, you want to take us through one of those? Here we're going to use our propagated snake plant to propagate more snake plants. Again, what you want to do with plants when you're making cuttings is generally you keep them out of direct sunlight. You want to keep them moist without drowning. The other thing you can do to them is periodically mist them with water just on their leaf surfaces. That'll just kind of keep them cool and give them a little bit of moisture through their leaf. Because again, they're not getting anything much from the soil at the beginning until they start to put out their own roots. So there are things you can do to protect them. We can also put them in trays with lids, as you can see across the greenhouse there, to just maintain a more humid environment so they don't dry out. Okay, then I think one of our last ones we're gonna do is this cactus. Okay, this is a cactus that I'm not entirely sure of the species. It's a barrel type cactus. But this one, again, is no different, except what you're looking at here in a cactus is the stem and the leaves. Okay, people forget the cactus have leaves, but the leaves are in the shape of a needle. So those needles you're seeing there have their evolutionary origin as leaves. And the green parts is stem material. And that's where the cactus does all of its photosynthesis, in its stems, not in its leaves. And its leaves are adapted to defend the plant. Okay, now we're going to go over to see the parent that is going to provide us an offspring. So actually, Mesa, why don't you walk over and you can pop one off and we'll film that. All right, so as you can see, the cup runneth over in this cactus. All right, so this is doing very well. And every one of these these would be branches essentially on this cactus. Okay, every one can be popped off and then asked to form roots, which all of these little cacti we have here, that's how we've propagated them. Okay, again, these were done same time in our class, or was it you did it?
I did them.
Okay, these are all Mesa's work. Probably about 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And as you can see, this one in particular has really gone crazy, producing a lot of its own stems off of this would have been the initial stem that was put in the ground. And it's doing really well. They all are, okay? Mesa's done a great job in this greenhouse. So, okay, why don't you demonstrate now? Cactus, of course, you have to be careful, okay? Mesa just pops them off with some tools here. You can use gloves to do this. They're pretty tough. You're not really gonna hurt them. Perfect, look at that, okay? But then otherwise, the same principles apply. Put a little bit of hormone at the base of that. No? You just settle them in? Oh, Okay.
They don't need any.
Okay. Yeah. So Mesa's just basically saying, and this is true for a lot of plants. They vary in their need for that hormone. Some are helped by it. Some it doesn't seem to matter. And then there are plants that are tough to root in general that don't seem to root well from their stems or leaves for various reasons. They're just a problem. Okay, it's that simple. Okay, now what I'm going to ask you to do, just to show people, Mesa, is to dig this one out, and let's just take a look at what the roots that have formed on that thing. Okay, essentially that whole thing is a root mass clinging to soil. That pot will need a little bit of water, but yeah, that's about what happens in about 6 months with these cacti. Not even 6 months. All right, so Mesa will settle that back in. It's probably a little too early to check on. It's now like 2 weeks since we set up our air layering of the rubber plants. It's probably too early to check on that, but that's continuing to chug along. Our transplanted coffee plant is adjusting to its new circumstances. But here is a rubber plant that Mesa propagated, again, several months ago from a cutting, just a standard cutting like we did with the crown of thorns. And it's basically, it's fully rooted. I can't even budge this thing out of this pot. So that one has succeeded. And I think maybe the last thing we'll do is take a look. Let's take a look at our coffee seeds to see if they're doing anything. I'm not expecting much, but let's see if you can reveal anything. Find some.
If I can find one. Oh.
Nothing yet?
Nothing.
Okay. All right. So again, coffee seeds take, in some cases, several months to germinate. So we'll just keep an eye on these things. They're in moist sand and vermiculite. We'll just let them go. All right, the last plant we're going to propagate today is this beautiful plant that Mesa brought into the greenhouse not too long ago. It's called a polka dot begonia. And these are really easy to root in water. So everything we've shown you today is how you root. It was how you root cuttings in media, soil-based media or artificial media. But this is really easy to root in water. Now, what you want to have is a node underwater, because that's where the roots will form, in the vicinity of a node. And a node on the stem of a plant is a spot where a leaf arises from the stem or a branch arises from the stem. Okay, so you want that in the water in order to propagate it. So, but you don't really need the leaf nearby it. Okay, so you can take that off. There you go, just like that. And then I would just basically dunk it in water. Okay, and that's all it takes to propagate this in water. Again, we'll put this somewhere, not in direct sunlight. It's now time where we have pulled the shade curtains back on our greenhouse. So it's not we're not quite getting the direct sun we did in all places. But for all of these things, we'll keep them a little bit out of the way so that they're not being hit by direct sun, given that they don't have roots at the moment. And then we will just keep an eye on them, like we said. With the water-based cuttings, you want to periodically change that water. It will become oxygen depleted, and sometimes algae can grow in it, become stagnant, so you want to change that out once in a while. But that's it. We'll just keep an eye on that and pot that up once it gets sufficient roots to support a new growing plant. All right, well, thanks for joining us on this episode of The Naturalist, where we've propagated a bunch of plants for you in the greenhouse. Stuff that's fun to do before things really take off outside. From here on out, though, I'll probably be outside quite a bit. Spring wildflower season's right around the corner. All right, see you next time. Bye-bye.